Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. I'm Jim Wingerter, and next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz. Next to him is Dolores Lowe. So Joe Biden is up to tricks again. So the comment was nuclear war. We're closer to than we even were with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Correct. Right. So that was it. Okay.
Because I did air raid drills in my first, second grade class under the desk in the classroom in Pennsylvania.
The duck and
when that happened. So we should be doing air raid drills.
So it was probably the most irresponsible statement ever said. So let's take a look at the setting where he said this statement, right? It was a group of Democrat donors sitting around. This wasn't an official meeting. This wasn't an address to Congress. This wasn't speaking to the American people. No, this was a bunch of fat cat Democrat donors, and he throws this out there, right? And this is on the heels of all of the tension between Ukraine and, the Ukrainians had just blown up the Crimean Bridge.
Right.
So the Russians were, stressing out. And then, like 2 days after Biden made that statement, Zelensky in Ukraine then goes off and starts saying that we should preemptively bomb Russia. So before Russia does anything, let's not wait till Russia does something and then bomb them. Before they do anything, let's bomb them, right? Which the Ukrainian...
Any fool knows that if you back Putin in a corner, he's coming out with nukes.
Yep, that is absolutely what's going to happen. So the U.S. government bought $290 million worth of anti-radiation medicine this month, right?
Iodine.
Basic iodine, right? And then we saw that video of New York City telling people what to do in case of a nuclear attack, which...
We just looked at this. That video came out about a week ago. If I was a New Yorker and I saw this on YouTube or on television, I would lose my mind.
Yep.
I couldn't believe it. Did you? You saw it.
I saw it.
This really, I guess, an articulate, attractive young lady gets out there with a really, really nice smile. Clearly, they're selling her projection, or whatever she's projecting. They're selling it using her whatever. And she says, effectively, so in the case of a nuclear attack, we don't know where it's going to come from and what's the reason for it. We just know that we've been attacked. Get out of your car. Mm-hmm. Get out of your car. Don't stay in your car. Go to your house. Get to an inner room in your house. If you have a basement, go to your basement. Stay there. Steps to take. Stay there. Wash your clothes. Get all the radiation off your clothes. Stay there and wait for official instructions. And then she ends by saying, "You got this."
Right.
What? And this is a infomercial. What's it called?
Infomercial.
Infomercial that's going out to all New Yorkers.
Yep. It was basically the same.
Now I know why New Yorkers are fleeing New York.
And you would think. I mean, it's always the intent in a war situation to reap the highest collateral damage for the least investment.
Right.
And so major cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles are prime targets.
Right. But the instructions were the same instructions that we in the South get for tornadoes.
That's my point.
Same exact.
Well, that's the other,
whenever they do whenever the weather people do an alert for hurricane, for instance, they're much more concerned about the persona that lady gave. I mean, not upset. There are not enough words to describe the ridiculousness of that infomotion, whatever you call it. You just cannot stand there and say that in the case of a nuclear strike, we don't know where it came from, and that doesn't matter. Just do these things. And the things that she's saying to do is not going to protect you from radiation fallout.
Right, exactly.
But the most absurd thing is stay tuned for information. Don't do anything. Sit there, wait for official information, and You got
Right.
this.
And when everyone's television goes dead, what do we do now?
Yeah, exactly.
Your
And when-
phone's not going to work.
Right, your phone, nothing
won't work.
electric will work. Nothing,
Right.
right? Because the electromagnetic resonance out of a nuclear bomb will just wipe off all electricity. Your car's
Absurd.
not going to run. Your
You know what's really
computers
upsetting
are
about
gone.
that is they're treating the American people the way that we behave, stupid.
Yes, they are.
And people are just incredibly dumbed down, and they're just pouring this dumb medicine on us, or whatever it is that they're doing to bring us to a place of being this dull. You know, they're just putting it on us.
Well, and it's also extremely irresponsible because what they're doing is baiting Putin, right? That's what they're doing.
Right.
Well, of course, we know that that's the ultimate goal, right? Get Putin to strike so that they can neutralize Russia and implement their Agenda 21, which is the big cleanup. The big cleanup is going to demand the reset. It's going to demand your pocketbooks. It's going to demand a whole change in civilization. So they know what they're doing. We've been talking about this. You know, I listened to Chelsea Gabbard with Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan kept pointing to, well, it's about the money. You know, this whole war buildup, the military, the industrial military complex, it's all about money. And I said, no, yes and no. The money that's being thrown into these wars and this particular war are just incentives, just to incentivize the Congress people, the corrupt politicians. So it's just incentive. So who's driving the incentives? Who's presenting the opportunities for incentives to these people, and why?
Right.
The people that are at the pinnacle of these things, of this movement, they don't care about the money. It's not about money with them. It's about their agenda. It's ideology. So what type of ideology is going to depend upon a nuclear war to accomplish its purpose? Well, the globalist ideology.
Yeah.
You know, we're overpopulated. We need to curb humanity. We need to introduce our great Agenda 21. But it's not all about money. For the people on the lower tier of this pyramid, yes, it's about money. You know, it's about getting, it's about Congress approving much, much more money than they actually need on the ground in the Ukraine. Where's that excess money going? Into the pockets of corrupt politicians? Yeah, it's about money, but it's also about incentivizing for their agenda. And we need to keep that in mind, that there's an agenda that wants to stoke the flames of a nuclear war to accomplish its ultimate goal, which is the subjugation of humanity into a new world order, into a world government. We've been talking about this for a long, long time. Now it's becoming so obvious and so manifest. It is not good to be right about these things.
Oh, agreed.
It is painful to see these things come in, proclaim them, and then see them fulfilled.
Well, Trump tweeted that the Biden administration needs to sit down at the negotiation table and try to bring about peace right after this thing, right? And I'm sitting here going, I remember when Biden first came into office and they were like, oh, the adults are now in charge, right? And I'm sitting here going, this is like one of the most irresponsible things that you could do as an administration.
This has me so upset. Hillary Clinton, why is she involved in this? I know why. The American people should be asking why. Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris are now echoing the same tune. All right? What is the tune that they're now echoing together with Biden and the media and the liberal media? This is unprovoked. Putin did this thing, and it's unprovoked. We didn't do anything to provoke this. How incredible when they're the ones that's been doing it for 15 years, stoking getting behind Putin, provoking him, ensuring that he will react the way he has reacted. But this is unprovoked. And you know what? The American people will believe it. Was it Goebbels, Hitler's Goebbels, that said if you tell a big enough lie and you tell it enough, people will believe you. That's where we are.
Yeah.
That's exactly where we are. The media is promoting this thing. We need justice.
Do you think that
we need God's justice?
Do you think that Mr. Putin is aware of what's happening here?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
But I mean, the whole, prodding him.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, he could choose to do otherwise, but he's in it too deep now.
But you
Yes,
see,
he
the
is.
Russians are different. their tack is very frontal. Their tack, the tack that they would employ in something like this isn't always well thought out. They're like a heavyweight boxer who can only throw uppercuts and hooks and straight rights. That's all he can do, and that's all they're going to do. They're not going to move. They're not going to feint. They're not going to do all those other things that a trained boxer is going to do. They're going to come right at you with the heavy punches, and that's Russia. So you're provoking Russia. You're causing Russia to back you into a corner and throw the bombs. That's what they're doing. Listen, the tack that the West is using is careful, it's meticulous, it's deliberate. And they've backed Putin into the corner.
Yeah.
Now Putin's going to come out swinging, and they're going to attain their goal. These people are devilish.
Yeah. He has said that tactical nuclear weapons are not off the map.
Right.
Right? So off the table, I'm sorry. Tactical nuclear weapons are not off the table. Now, had it been a normal administration, the moment he said that, they should have started negotiations to try to de-escalate what's going on.
Right.
Instead, they do something like this.
Yeah.
And then they go and tell New Yorkers stuff, and the Russian intelligence knows all of the stuff, just like we know all their stuff, right? We have people on the ground, and they have people on the ground gathering all this stuff. So now Putin is hearing, oh, we're close to Armageddon. Oh, New York is getting ready to be bombed.
We are close to Armageddon.
Well, yeah. Yes, we are.
Not their definition of Armageddon,
right.
the biblical definition.
I thought it interesting that Biden did use the word Armageddon, and I'm like, but obviously you don't know what that means.
Well, listen, they would use those keywords to create attention. They're striking words that will get the American people's attention. They're designed to stoke the flame. So he says Armageddon, and the whole world's just going to say, "Oh, Armageddon!"
Right.
So, and of course, with that, he would say, "We did nothing to cause this. This is all Putin."
This has been such an irresponsible administration. The world is on fire, and it's on fire because of this administration. Because I can guarantee you that Putin waited until Biden was in office to launch the attack on Ukraine, because he knew he was going to have someone weak, right?
Well, yes, and I see more to it than that. Yes, that's true. Putin, I am convinced that Putin did not want to do this. When Biden got in office, the pressure that came from that administration onto Russia began to mount up, putting Putin and Russia in a place where they had to react. With the former administration, with Trump, none of that pressure was being applied. This administration came in, they began to tote the same line that had been toted for decades before, well, at least a decade and a half, which is to continue to provoke Putin, continue to provoke Russia. And it wasn't that Russia chose that time to attack the Ukraine, it was that he was being pushed into it heavily by this administration. I mean, remember, it was Biden and his son and many others that were involved in horrible corruption in the Ukraine. And every time Putin would raise an eyebrow, they would just pummeil him openly and publicly. So, yeah, for they to get up and say that this is totally unprovoked, what blatant lies. You choose two women that are highly questionable on every front, even as it relates to their spiritual practice. I'm saying two occultists, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, that has no problem projecting blatant lies, that gets up and says this is totally unprovoked. And the whole world will say, oh, they said it's unprovoked. We believe them. Well, when we've been provoking Putin for 15 years.
The whole time Bill was president, we all figured out after a while that whatever came out of his mouth, the opposite was the truth.
Right.
Why?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that Kamala Harris, at every single appearance, has given us a word salad, right? Until now. This time she was coherent, because I kept thinking, because you know all her speeches are written for her, right?
And she still giggles all the way through.
She still gets it all wrong. I'm like, if I were the one, I'd start questioning things. And now all of a sudden she's coherent, right? Because everything has been word salad to this date. But anyway. Okay.
So it's just amazing what's happening there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So it is the time of Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles, as we Christians refer to it. I know that for decades, the Jerusalem Christian Embassy has entertained Christians coming up to Jerusalem to
Right.
celebrate Feast of Tabernacles. Have you been there for a Feast of Tabernacles?
That was our first trip to Israel in 1990 for Feast of Tabernacles.
Quite a spectacular event, and I know that this year there's about 2,000 Christians.
The International Christian
Christian
Embassy in
Embassy.
Jerusalem expects 2,000
Now that's still kind of slight. When we were there, there
Yeah.
were 3,000, 3,500-ish.
Well, about
Well-
5 years ago, there was between 10 and 15,000.
Right.
So the numbers have dropped drastically.
Because of COVID, I'm going to...
Yeah.
Because
Well-
of COVID, yeah.
Pre-COVID, Christians made up 4.5 million people. 4.5 million Christians visited Israel annually, right?
Okay.
And then the first year of COVID, that dropped to 800,000, and then they shut everything down, and nobody could get in.
Right.
Right. So
There is something else that's underlying that's affecting Christian involvement in Israel and the reception of Christian involvement in Israel. And back in 2015, I think it was, I went on to a talk show in Jerusalem. Jeremy Gimpel and Ari Abramovich, they had a talk show. And right at that time, there was a Christian evangelistic push in Israel. They were about to have this huge meeting, conference in Jerusalem, and it was all about how to go about evangelizing Jews, Israeli Jews. That was the whole purpose of the conference. And they were about to bring Christians in from all over the world. It was to happen in May, and I went and sat with Ari and Jeremy on this interview talk show in March. And I just felt it necessary to come right out and address what was coming, right? And I did that. And I said that Christians that are using deception in order to deceive and evangelize are no better than Muslims who uses taqiyya, blatant lies to accomplish their jihad goals. And I called them out, right? And so, like I said before, the Dominican order, the head of the Dominican order in Jerusalem, contacted Ari and Jeremy and says, don't let that guy back on your show again, ever. So they didn't like what I had to say. All right, long story short, that conference occurred, and after that conference, Christian evangelists, missionaries, began to roll up their sleeves and began to engage in all kinds of deception. There was a guy who was exposed about 6 months ago who posed to be a rabbi. He was pretending to be a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi. His wife dressed the part, his children all dressed the part.
I remember that story.
But he was actually functioning in an undercover way to evangelize Jews.
Right.
And there's been other examples like that where Christians were encouraged and trained to be deceptive and to lie and deceive for the sake of evangelism. Now, since all that has come to light, this has interfered with Israel's response to people like us. People like us who want to simply stand with Israel and be an encouragement to bolster their faith and so on without an agenda. We are now being horribly affected by the actions of these people. Now, this is very, very current in Israel. Our friends in Israel, Ari and Jeremy, are receiving tremendous backlash right now as a result of what's happening. They're sort of blaming Ari and Jeremy for some of this because they are free to engage with Christians. They do so, and now they're receiving a lot of pushback from anti-missionary groups in Israel. So this is no doubt affecting Israelis' perspective concerning people like us, and Christians are being swayed.
Right.
Because the more Israelis react, is the more that Christians are going to say, wait a minute, they're hostile towards us. So there's a horrible thing happening. No good came from it. And this is, from my point of view, no doubt the work of the devil. Would the Holy Spirit lead evangelism in such a way that deception and lies are employed to accomplish any good work?
Nope.
Do we see any examples like that in the
So
book of
amazed
Acts?
at the people that say, what would Jesus do?
Right.
and then employ tactics of deception.
Right.
Do we see anything like that? You know, they might say, well, Paul said, for the Jew I become a Jew, for the Gentile I become a Jew. That's not what Paul was saying about.
No.
Paul would have never employed deception.
They didn't read the entire, they didn't read it
They
in
took it out of
context.
context,
Yeah.
which is a notorious Christian practice.
And the sad thing is that the state of Christianity today is so poor that we need to be evangelizing Christians.
We're worse off, yes, we're worse off now than we were 20 years
Yes.
ago. And that's because the emergent church movement, the ultra grace movement, and other movements that has come only in the last 20 years. But it's really pointing to a global religion.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
It's really leading to global ecumenicalism. We have to break down all of these rigid barriers so that we can bring the Muslims in, we can bring the Hindus in, we can bring the Satanists in, and we can all hold hands and sing Kumbaya.
Yep.
That's the impetus behind this. In the meantime, they're creating such a mess.
Yep.
For people that truly and genuinely see the value of supporting and standing with Israel and really wants to do so in a pure way, we're just being destroyed. We're being wrecked.
Right. Well, you know, we're back. So at the dawn of Christianity, right, when the Romans finally allowed Christianity to be a faith, when
The Great Compromise.
yes, the Great Compromise, then in order to be a Roman official, you had to burn incense to the Christian God, right? Because that's how the Romans operated. So then you had all these people who didn't believe in Christ, just say they did, just so they could do it.
Right.
And it's so they could get the job. And we're in that same situation where people who, like, for example, story that we weren't going to cover, but now I am going to cover, is there's an ad campaign to, quote, fix the Jesus brand from what the damage that Jesus' followers have done.
Yeah.
Right? And they're basically turning Jesus into a social justice warrior.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'm just, and you know how many people are going to get sucked in by this?
Yeah, their arguments are really forceful. They present themselves as intellectuals. They're unabashed communists. I know them. I follow a couple of them on the internet, and I understand where they're coming from. Why do I follow them? Because I want to see what they're up to. And they are dangerous.
Yes.
They are dangerous. And any thread of fundamentalism is condemned and crushed by their words. They are very powerful and they're very, very able to condemn. And they do so effectively. So these people are not Christians by any means, but they are proponents of this new Jesus, this
Right.
new global Jesus, where we can usher in a different Jesus together with a new Buddha, with a different Muhammad, and a different, Zoroastrian, and we can just pull all of these religious leaders together and form a new religion. That's what they're doing.
And it is the liberal side. Right now there's a case in the state of Kentucky where 3 Jewish women who are obviously reformed, liberal Judaism, are suing the state of Kentucky for banning abortion because it is imposing on them the Christian view of where life begins. So they've obviously not read their Old Testament, well, their Torah at all, right? And they haven't read the Psalms at all.
Well,
It just.
they would argue it's your view of the Torah, it's your view of the Psalms.
David said, "You knit me in the womb before you knew me," right?
Yeah. But you see, you're taking a contextual fundamentalist position. Shame on you for doing that. You should be more open to interpretation and circumstances.
I think the Jewish people have their private arguments over these issues as well between
no
the
doubt.
sects.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Yep.
The more Orthodox Jews, the more Orthodox movements will not support abortion
Right.
at
Right.
all. The liberal Judaism will certainly will fight for it.
Right.
Beyond support it, they will roll up their sleeves and
But-
duke it out
Yeah,
for it.
and it's the same with Christianity, right? The liberal
yeah,
Christians,
absolutely.
you name it, they're supporting it, right? There is nothing that the world can come up with that liberal Christianity will not find a way to support.
Right. Oh, yeah. It's all the same. It's the same horse, slightly different colors, but it's the same horse. So it's the way of the world, and we invited this into our civilization, to our culture, and it's entrenched into our culture, and we just have to be aware of it and learn how to function around it.
So my happy news did not turn out to be happy news. I'm
Happy,
sorry.
happy?
Sorry, no happy news this go round.
That's all right. That's the reality of where we are.
Yep.
But happy news is that Christians are continuing to go up to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem, to celebrate
Yeah.
Feast of Tabernacles. This is good. Not as many as we would like. We saw this movement gaining strength, and by now there would be 50,000 Christians in Jerusalem celebrating Feast of Tabernacles. So I think the three of us are planning to go up to Israel and to go up to Jerusalem next spring. And this is good. More and more Christians need to resume those activities and not let the anti-missionaries in Israel and the missionaries in Christianity obstruct them. We need to, as a program, a Voice to the Gentile Church, as a program that's geared towards encouraging Christians to understand their Judeo-Christian foundation as it relates to Israel. We want to encourage our listeners to know that our involvement with Israel goes way beyond anything that the missionaries are propagating and anything that the anti-missionaries are trying to defend. It is a stated obligation in the Bible to stand with Israel, to be a servant to Israel. And that is our primary call as it relates to Israel. And that really is for our generation today, more so than previous generations of Christians. Previous generations of Christians did not have this opportunity, the opportunity that we have.
No.
Right.
And we're able to support Israel
Yeah.
from here, Israelites, and we're able to support Israelites who are living in America also.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel bad because I think we are too tough on particularly, Christianity. And then I'll read things like I've been reading today, and it just upsets me.
Well, listen, at this point in time, there is a polarization occurring in the church.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of like during the time of Jeremiah. God's word to Israel through Jeremiah was what? Surrender to the Babylonians. If you resist, then you will be destroyed. Get ready, I'm bringing destruction upon you. And that was a hard message for Jeremiah to communicate.
Sure.
How could you compromise with that message?
He was seen as a traitor.
Yep.
How could you say, well, I feel bad for bringing this message to... How could he have said, I really don't want to hurt the feelings of the kings of Judah. I really don't want to hurt their feelings. And so he just had to deliver the message. In fact, there was a time when Jeremiah was beginning to lighten up. And he was praying for these people. And God said, cease, stop.
That's right.
Don't pray for them.
Yep, he did.
So we have to maintain the message because this is that time. We are that voice calling in the wilderness, and we can't compromise the message. We have to call out Christianity because, again, this polarization is occurring, and should we be quiet about it? I don't think we should.
And the hot buttons are abortion and gay rights.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are the major hot buttons that are socially engineered.
Those are just points of provocation.
Right.
That's what they really come down to, points of provocation.
But the challenge is for the church to compromise on those issues.
Right.
There's much greater evil that's
Yes.
expanding all around us.
Right.
But those are hot points, like you said. Those are provocative pokers. Bringing us out is what they're doing. Is actually they're trying to
Right.
bring us out.
So keep our focus on the things that really matter and not on the garbage.
Right.
So I have a great question, and the question is, what ancient kingdom or empire represented Babylon in the Bible? Was it Babel under Nimrod, or was it Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar? This gets a little confusing. Also, in Revelation, Babylon appears again. What is that about?
Okay, yeah. So in our conventional history, we study about the Great Sumerian Empire. The Great Sumerian Empire, it was the empire that gave us all sorts of advancements. In fact, they were the inventors of civilization. They gave us commerce. They gave us
Law.
well, governance, governmental system that will serve the masses of that Sumerian empire. They gave us a military. They gave us a religion that encompassed all of that empire, and they had a language that was unified, the Sumerians, and that's really from a conventional historic perspective. So if you do a historiography on the Sumerians, that's what you're going to learn about the Sumerians. They were very progressive. They invented civilization. They invented agriculture. They made agriculture a commercial endeavor. And so they gave us civilization. We're talking here about roughly 3000 BC, 3,500 years before Christ, roughly. So biblically now, who are the Sumerians? Sumer was the father of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh translates to Nimrod. Sumer is Cush. Cush's name in that particular language that derived after Babel was Sumer. That's Cush. So Cush had Nimrod, and Nimrod established that's what we call the Sumerian Empire. Nimrod's kingdom spanned the entire Fertile Crescent. So this is what made Nimrod's kingdom great. Nimrod's kingdom governed the entire world for a period of roughly 250 years, from Cush, his father, all the way to Nimrod. When Nimrod finally lost control of Babel, it became known as Babel, you're talking about 350 years. So Nimrod, they believe, lived to about 250 years and died. But his father, Cush, was the one, or Sumer, was the one who established that empire that would become global. Became known as Babel, or in Hebrew, Babylon. So when you say Babel, Babel is sort of an English derivation, but it's really Babylon in Hebrew. What does Babylon mean? Confusion of language, right? Babylon.
They babbled.
Yeah,
right.
Confusion of Babylon. So Nimrod's Babel, or Gilgamesh, the Sumerian Empire, was the first of the first really empire that employed or invented civilization following the flood. Civilization existed before the flood. In fact, the actual, I'll call him the framer of civilization, was Cain.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Cain was the one, in rebellion against God, built a city.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that activity, we see the rise of civilization. Ultimately, civilization became so corrupt that God decided that he had to destroy all of it.
Right.
And then he commanded Noah and his sons to spread out, to expand and populate the earth, which is sort of what he said to Cain. You'll be a wanderer, a vagrant, go. He wanted humanity to follow that same path, to go out. Instead, humanity centralized their resources and created civilization. This was in rebellion. And we know what God did. How did God respond? In fact, with Noah and his sons, he made a covenant with them that they would, in fact, spread out. And if they would be obedient to the requirements of the covenant, he would not destroy the earth again. Well, they were not.
Right.
they were
There's
not.
a shocker.
In a matter of 200 years or so, they began to rebel against God, and they built a civilization. Their aspirations were to build a civilization as great as what existed before the flood. The difference is before the flood and after the flood is the building, the building technology. They didn't have the means to build temples with massive stones the size of this room. They didn't have that anymore. That existed before the flood. So what did they do? They made bricks. And not little bricks like this, right? 8 by 4 by 2.5. They made bricks that were probably about 3 feet across, 2 feet wide, about 8 inches thick. So that's what they began to do. And based on that new technology, which was the making of bricks, they began to build civilization. A tower, whose top will reach into heaven. Before the flood, these massive structures like the pyramids that are found in Egypt and in China and certain parts of the world were not built by man. They were built by the what's called the Nephilim. Only the Nephilim had what was necessary to build with those stones. So man begins to build civilization. Their goal was to rival what existed before the flood. That became known as Babylon because God divided up the language and the languages and the language and scattered them. There was one language, and that language, no doubt, was Aramean. So what we know as Aramean. So that Babel was destroyed. In fact, based on the book of Yasher, have you read the book of Yasher?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Based on the book of Yasher, what we find in Genesis chapter 14, where Kedorlaomer was his name, and Tidal, king of nations, or king of Goyim, came to make war with the kings of the Jordan Valley, the Dead Sea area. You know the story in Genesis 14, and,
Right.
and Lot was taken out
Right.
by Kedorlaomer and the other three kings. Abraham went out to redeem Lot with 300 men and destroyed these four great kings from Mesopotamia. Well, according to the book of Yasher and other sources, Kedorlaomer was actually Sargon, the great king Sargon, who defeated Nimrod. And Tidal, king of Goyim, or king of nations, was actually Nimrod. And according to the book of Yasher, Abraham killed him, just as it was prophesied. Now, so that great thing happened. The great Mesopotamian empire began to lose strength following their defeat, because these are great kings with their men who came all the way from the Mesopotamia, the Chaldean Mesopotamia, and they came all the way around to address these kings who were in rebellion against them. And a warrior, a Bedouin basically, with his men, destroyed them, defeated them, and set them a chase. So the Mesopotamian empires began to decline after that. This great king Sargon, of course he died and so on. But then following Sargon, the first Sargon, the Assyrians attempted to establish or reestablish the great might of the Aramean kingdom. And they began to build an empire, the Assyrians did. And then, of course, there was Sargon, the second Sargon, who came into power. He was a powerful king, and he destroyed Samaria and so on. Then came Sennacherib. Sennacherib was not as powerful or greater king as Sargon. Well, following Sennacherib, 2 or 3 kings came into existence after them, Sumerian kings. And then Nabopolassar, who was the father of Nebuchadnezzar, came and destroyed the Assyrian empire. So his son now, Nebuchadnezzar, built what we know as Babylon in the Bible. So Nimrod's Babylon was destroyed by Sargon. Apparently, based on the narrative I have, Abraham defeated these kings, killed Nimrod, and that kingdom began to wane. Then comes the Assyrians, and the Assyrians begins to build empire again. Sennacherib was the first king to ever establish a standing army. Every king or kingdom before Sennacherib had armies that were civilians. They were farmers and fishermen and during the year, but in the fighting months, which would be, in the cooler months, they would become soldiers and go out and fight. Well, Sennacherib invented the first standing army, and he was somewhat successful, but he didn't succeed. So the Babylonians defeated the Assyrians, and here comes Nebuchadnezzar. He determines to identify his kingdom as Babylon. Aligning himself with the great king Sargon, and before him Nimrod. So Nebuchadnezzar wanted to identify himself as the new Nimrod, the new Gilgamesh. And so he built this kingdom that became known as Babylon by the fact that the Israelites were referring to his kingdom as Babylon because it was in the same location. So his kingdom became known as Babylon from the standpoint of the Bible. So you have Nimrod, Nebuchadnezzar. So now the Bible gives us yet another picture of a Babylon that's in the future. What we're going to see here in a few minutes is that Jeremiah really painted a picture of what that Babylon would be like. And he named that Babylon. And we're going to look at that here in a few moments. So yes, there are 3 Babylons, you can see. Nimrod's Babylon, or Babel. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, or Babel. And of course, the final form of Babylon, I'll refer to it as the Babylon of the beast. The beast
Right.
being the world government that we're seeing in the world today. So, Jeremiah now in Jeremiah chapter 25, 15 and 18, this has to do with what we saw. I don't think maybe we studied this on the program before. We saw in Isaiah chapter 24 that God had determined that a curse would cover the entire world, and that ultimately that curse will bring the nations into judgment. Jeremiah chapter 25 now, Jeremiah begins to deal with the process of that judgment, and it begins in Jerusalem, right? So in Jeremiah chapter 15 to 18, we see here the prophet declaring on behalf of God that God is preparing to bring judgment that will begin in Jerusalem and ultimately end in a place called Shishak. Now, Shishak, it's represented in the Bible twice, and it's a cryptogram for Babylon. Right. Shinar, which is the plains of Shinar, it's a cryptogram for Babylon. So let's read Jeremiah 25, 15 to 18.
For thus the Lord, the God of Israel, says to me, take this cup of the wine of my wrath from my hand, and cause all the nations to whom I send you to drink it, and they shall drink and stagger and go mad because of the sword that I will send among them. Then I took the cup from the Lord's hand and made all the nations drink, to whom the Lord sent me, Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, and its kings and its princes, to make them a ruin, a horror, a hissing, and a curse, as it is this day.
So pause there for a moment. So Jeremiah is being sent out into the nations to take the word, right? Mm-hmm. To take the word that God had prepared for the nations. But then he says also to take a sword. So we know from Ephesians chapter 6 that the word of God is a sword. What Paul referred to as the sword of the Spirit. So the sword that Jeremiah is taken out into the nations is in fact the word. That God will bring judgment against the nations. And the basis of the judgment is how they've related to the people of Israel. That word stands to today. It hasn't changed. God is not a man that he should lie. He does not change his mind. So this word has gone out. How did it go out? Did Jeremiah go out into the nations and say, here, this is the word of God, thus says the Lord? No. There's no evidence that he even ever left the land of Israel.
Right.
For no reason. I mean, he went to the Euphrates and he buried his waistband, but that's about as far as he went. So how did Jeremiah go out how did he go out into the nations with this word?
The people of
Exactly.
The people that were exiled carrying
So
scrolls on their backs.
we've seen the endless images of the wandering Jew,
right,
carrying the scrolls as they go out. The scrolls went out by the multiple thousands. Mm-hmm. Why? Because in 70 AD, when the Romans drove the people of Israel out of the land of Israel, they took with them the many hundreds of thousands of scrolls that were scribed by the ministry of the scribes since the time of Ezra. Remember, Ezra found the Torah, and he determined that, well, what we're going to do here from now on is we're going to scribe thousands of Torahs so that the word of God would be proliferated. And he did that. He was an excellent reformer, and he instituted that there would be scribes who would sit, and their entire occupation would be to sit and scribe. And so thousands upon thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of scrolls of the Torah, of the prophets, were all done. And Israel literally, after 70 AD, took the word of God with them out of the land of Israel into the nations. A part of me believes that this was God's plan. Mm-hmm. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That God wanted, the dispersion of Israel, the diaspora occurred in 3 steps. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, we talked about the Assyrians, 722 BC with Sargon II. And then, of course, 586 with Babylon, with Nebuchadnezzar, but then the Romans. Now, the dispersion that occurred with the Romans, which was the final leg in the final phase of the dispersion, was complete. What I mean by that is, unlike the Assyrians and the Babylonians, the Romans left none in the land. Their objective was to push them all out, like a bulldozer, just push them out. Push them into the Mediterranean, push them into the desert, push them, and which is what they did.
And they plowed the city and salted it so that nothing would grow. There's nothing to go back to.
And as they pushed the masses out, no question, many tried to come back in, and they did, but then they were pushed out again. So the Bar Kokhba revolt is very much that. Mm-hmm. So as they were pushing them out, they were going to North Africa, to Babylon, even further north into the regions of Ashkenaz and into Europe. And as they went, they were taking these scrolls with them. And so the word of Jeremiah and the word of Isaiah, the word of God, the Torah, was being taken out into the nations. And the word was God's bringing judgment. So read.
If God judged us, He'll certainly judge you.
That's the word. God's bringing judgment because He has destroyed His own city.
Right.
And for the purpose of idolatry, He has destroyed His own city. So what is He going to do with you?
Right.
And your idolatry? That's the word, that's the sword that Jeremiah took out into the nations. So He said that you will drink, right? So do us a favor. Read 25, 15, and 16 again.
For thus the Lord, the God of Israel, says to me, take this cup of the wine of wrath from my hand, and cause all the nations to whom I send you to drink it, and they shall drink and stagger and go mad.
The cup of wine there is representative or indicative of His judgment, His wrath, right? So now, 26 now is where we will see the reality of Shishak. Shishak is a cryptogram, again.
Right.
All scholars agree with this, and I don't know exactly how the cryptogram is formed, the Hebrew cryptogram.
I do.
Okay,
it's a word study in Hebrew. So Babel in Hebrew is spelled Bet Lamed.
Okay.
So the second letter, and I think it's like the 13th letter. Mm-hmm. Shishak goes from the other end of the Aleph Bet. So Shin is the second letter from the end. Mm-hmm. Right. And likewise then the 13th letter from the end.
Okay.
So Shishak is Babylon. It's cryptic. Why is it cryptic? It's cryptic because it's pointing not to Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. It's pointing to a future Babylon, a Babylon in the distant future. And in 51, we'll see that here in a few moments and establish that. But I want us to read what comes after his statement about the judgment of Shishak. So read 26 for us.
And all the kings of the north, near and far, one with another, and all the kingdoms of the earth which are upon the face of the ground, and the king of Shishak shall drink after them. And you shall say to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, drink, be drunk, vomit, fall, and rise no more because of the sword which I send among you.
The sword is the word of God.
Right.
All right. Okay. Go on. Keep going. It's the 32.
And it will be, if they refuse to take the cup of your hand from your hand to drink, then you will say to them, thus said the Lord of hosts, you shall surely drink. For behold, I am beginning to work calamity in this city which is called by my name. And shall you be completely free from punishment? Mm-hmm. You will not be free from punishment, for I am summoning a sword against all the inhabitants of the earth, declares the Lord of hosts. Therefore you shall prophesy against them all these words, and you shall say to them, the Lord will roar from on high, and utter his voice from his holy habitation. He will roar mightily against his fold. He will shout like those who tread the grapes. Against all the inhabitants of the earth, a clamor has come to the end of the earth, because the Lord has a controversy with the nations. He is entering into judgment with all flesh. As for the wicked, he has given them to the sword, declares the Lord.
So, Shishak, king of Shishak. Shishak is Babylon, but not the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar.
Right.
What we're going to do now when we study, when we read a little bit in Jeremiah chapter 51 is that Jeremiah 51 is focused on the destruction of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. But then it shifts from Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon in 41 to 45 or 51, and it begins to point to a spiritual Babylon, because God says through Jeremiah that I will destroy Baal of Babylon. Who's Baal? Baal is Baal,
Right.
Baal.
Right.
Who's Baal? Baal is the primary god of the Babylonians. They had Chemosh and other gods, but Baal was their primary, or Baal was their primary god. So what we're going to see here in 51 is that God is in chapter 51 of Jeremiah, he's going to destroy Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. That Babylon that existed at that time, but then he points to a future Babylon, and he uses the word Shishak, and the destruction of the spirit of Babylon, which is Baal, who is Satan himself. Now, remember, we've talked about this before in Numbers chapter 25, when Balaam prophesied. Remember, he attempted to curse Israel,
Right.
couldn't curse Israel, he can only bless Israel. And so he himself said that whoever God blesses, no one can curse. And yet he endeavored to curse Israel, and he ended up blessing Israel. So in 25 now, he gives an oracle, he prophesies, and he says concerning Amalek, the first of the nations, its destruction will be at the last. So we just read how God will begin the process of judgment in his own house, in his own city, Jerusalem. Like Peter said, judgment begins in the house of God, right? That's where that principle comes from. So he begins judgment in Jerusalem, and it goes ultimately to Shishak, and it ends with Shishak. Amalek is the first of the nations. Who's Amalek? The first of the nations. Amalek was Nimrod's Babel, right? That's the first of all the nations.
Okay.
The first of all the nations was Nimrod's Babel. So Balaam rightly prophesied and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but its end will be destruction. So he's talking about that time when God will destroy that future Babylon. Amalek. Amalek is Babel. Babel is Amalek. The spirit behind Babylon is Amalek.
Right, gotcha.
Right.
So we're going to quickly visit the Babylon of today, this new Babylon, in a few moments. But let's read in Jeremiah chapter 51, where Jeremiah is prophesying about the destruction of Babylon, but he shifts to a future Babylon in 41 to 45.
How Shishak has been captured,
There is your cryptogram again.
and the praise of the whole earth been seized. How Babylon has become an object of horror among the nations. The sea has come up over Babylon. She has been engulfed with its tumultuous waves. Her cities have become an object of horror, a parched land and a desert, a land in which no man lives, and through which no son of man passes. But I shall punish Bel in Babylon, and I shall make what he has swallowed come out of his mouth, and the nations will no longer stream to him. Even the wall of Babylon has fallen down. Come forth from her midst, my people, and each of you save yourselves from the fierce anger of the Lord.
So 45 is the key to understanding that this is future Babylon. There are a couple of keys, three of them. One, Shishak, the mention of Shishak,
Right.
the cryptogram. Two, Baal being judged.
Right.
That's the spirit of Babylon. It made the reference that the nations will no longer run to Baal, to Baal. God's going to punish him. But then the third reference here that points to this being future Babylon is what you just read in 45. Come out of her.
Right.
Don't be partaker in her iniquity, her
Right.
destruction. Where do we see that elsewhere in the Bible?
The statements in Revelation. Isn't it?
Revelation chapter 18. So what God gave us with Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 45, is a clear indicator that Babel is the future Babylon. So Shishak is that final Babylon, final manifestation of Babylon that God himself will destroy. How will God destroy that future Babylon? He's going to send his son, and his son will come with his bride, and judgment will be executed against that Babylon. So in Revelation now as you read this, Jim, and as our listeners, as you hear this, keep in mind what we just read in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 45, as we read Revelation chapter 18, 1-5. In other words, that exhortation that was given in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 45, is meant for us at this time. When I say for us, I mean us as believers, because the word that we're about to hear a second time in Revelation chapter 18 is for us to come out of her, to don't partake in her destruction. Babylon today is this world system, okay? It is this world system. Forget Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar only had ideations of being Babylon. He never attained to it. But Nimrod attained to it.
Right.
Nimrod had a global army. He controlled with his army the entire Fertile Crescent. He had a global economic structure that controlled the entire world at that time. He had a global religion. And that global religion served to subdue and to hold the masses of the entire world, civilization, into control. Keep them in control. He had one language. And what else did he have? A political order that contained 5 aspects of that global government he had. And he used it for at least 250 years to subdue, to control, and to establish his kingdom. That's what Nimrod did. Successful.
Right.
Successful in that sense. Now, today we're seeing Shishak, Babylon 2, Shishak. What do we see? The attributes of the aspects of this new Babylon, this new Babel, are the same. Global governance.
Yep.
Right.
Global economy.
Right.
Global economy,
Right.
a global army,
Global army.
and a global religion.
Right.
The same entities that are working towards a global government are also working feverishly towards a global religion.
Yeah, and we're closely coming upon a global language because everything on the internet, I can load up
Absolutely.
a web page from China and read it in English, right?
Absolutely. I can jump on my
It doesn't
phone.
always make complete sense,
Yeah,
but you can read
but
it.
we're getting there.
I can jump on my phone and have a conversation with someone
Right.
in Madeira, Portugal. Even though I don't speak Portuguese, I can have that conversation.
Yeah.
Google Translate.
Right. So the language is what? Electronic?
Yes.
Digital?
Yes.
Absolutely. So here we are, folks. We are seeing Babylon 2. We are seeing the rise of Shishak. It's arising right before us. There are powerful people in high places that are working to bring this into existence, have been doing so for at least 140 years. A concerted effort to bring this into existence, and they've attained to it. You ever stop and wonder, what was it that worked in conjunction with global banking at the beginning of the 1900s? What worked in conjunction with global banking, global financing, global economy, to bring about global ecumenicalism? Why was global ecumenicalism, ecumenicalism is global, why was Christian ecumenicalism introduced at the same time with global banking and the prospect of a new type of government that encompasses all the world? Because it was their effort. World War I and II, the real purpose for World War I and II was to break down national barriers and create the basis for a global government. That's because right after World War I, the League of Nations came along and said, okay, folks, that was terrible, but trust us and it will never happen again.
Right, let's make sure this never happens again.
Yeah.
The world said, hey, you guys are powerful, you guys are influential, you're statesmen, we'll trust you. And what happened? A mere 30 years later, it happens
another
again.
war.
Right.
Well, less than 30 years, it happens again.
Right.
And the same critters that gave us the League of Nations gave us the United Nations.
Right.
It's interesting, it took out the Tsar of Russia, and it took out the feudal system in Europe, basically.
Right.
In order to break down those barriers that created nationalistic
Right.
Well, and that's been the push.
ideology.
Right. And that's been the push ever since, right? That's why the European Union came into being.
Absolutely.
And they're trying to push it across the world. And the next thing we're going to hear is the United Nations would be effective if it had its own military. Which they've already been saying.
We've been hearing that.
Right.
When Barack Obama purchased that prime real estate in D.C. to build the new headquarters for the United Nations, when he did that, folks, they were looking forward to that time when the United Nations, according to Pope Benedict XVI, will gain its teeth.
Right.
Yep.
That's what he said.
He did.
The time is
he
coming
did.
when the time
He
is
did.
coming when the
One of the last people I would have expected to
Yes.
say that. He said it.
Listen, the United Nations is a corrupt.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
going to say more than that. They're corrupt, of course. The continent of Africa knows how corrupt they are, right? I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but really bad things have happened under the control of the UN. Those blue helmets are feared and revered and,
Sure.
and dreaded throughout Africa.
The world's rapers.
Yes.
Listen, the United Nations is a deeply, deeply spiritually rooted organization. Margaret Sanger and some of those other people that were instrumental in the formation of the United Nations, these were occultists on the highest levels. You think about people like Madame Helena Blavatsky and her inspired Aleister Crowley and all of these people that were not just complicit or involved with the formation of the UN, but they were cheering it along. The United Nations is a deeply, deeply spiritual structure.
And,
It's
and
evil.
in Jerusalem, it's situated on the mountain of evil counsel.
Yes, absolutely. But I'll give you one better than that.
Okay.
On Mount Hermon is where they make their most important decisions. There's a structure up there where they meet and they make their most critical decisions on Mount Hermon. Why on Mount Hermon? What's the purpose of Mount Hermon?
Blessings and cursing, right?
No, and that's Ebal and Gerazim.
That's
Sorry.
Mount
all right.
Hermon is where the angels, the fallen angels, came down. And from there they began to rebel, from Mount Hermon. The occultists, they see Mount Hermon in that light. This is where the first rebellion, the rebellion of the angels,
Because
took
we
place.
would also argue that's where Jesus was transfigured.
Jesus went up to Mount Hermon and did not rebel. He was the one who
Obedient.
provided their propitiation, right?
Right.
So in standing on Mount Hermon and perfectly obeying God, in effect, he was making a statement to the fallen angels who rebelled against him on that same spot.
Right, okay.
Right? But the UN has a high office up on that mountain. And there they make their most secretive and their most important decisions. Look into it. You'll be
Yeah,
shocked.
I am already.
Well, yeah. And the sad thing is, never in since the flood, never in human history have we had so much information at our fingertips and so little people reading it, right?
Right.
Because this whole discussion on the UN, I can guarantee you that 90% of the people that, if the world were listening to our show, they would say, oh, they're crazy.
You mean our 75 followers?
That's all right. There's 75 people that want to grow.
Yes.
Listen, if you can enlighten one person, you can
Right.
enlighten the
You
universe.
won.
Yes.
That's
you
right.
Can,
Yes.
You can enlighten the universe. So, the United Nations, horribly, horribly corrupt, but they are effectively Babylon. They are
Yes.
Right.
the seat of Babylon. Now, it's not just the UN. The UN is almost, not quite, but almost a cover organization. The organizations that are supporting the UN, and there are many of them, they're all working conjunctively to bring about this final Babylon. And it's happening. It's
Right.
unfolding right around us. How is it that the American people can be so duped into being led into a conflict that will lead to a nuclear exchange that will bring an end to our existence? When I say our existence, the way we exist. It will literally change the face of our civilization. We're not a great civilization, but what they have in store for us, listen, let's be hypothetical, okay? Just to be hypothetical. They keep pushing Putin's buttons. The Hillary Clintons, the Bidens and the Kamala Harrises, and all of the media proud. They continue to grab the tiger by the tail, so to speak. All right? And suddenly he decides, yeah, well, I'm going to make good. They've been pushing me on this for 15 years. I'm going to nuke a city, and I'm going to nuke Kiev. A horrible, horrible prospect. My goodness. And he uses a tactical nuke, and he destroys half of the city. There's nuclear fallout. Terrible thing has happened. Suddenly the world says, oh, this is unprovoked. The same nonsense that they're saying now, even though they've been provoking him for 15 years. Oh, this is unprovoked. We must respond in kind. And suddenly Russia is obliterated. A wasteland of destruction. Now, what comes next? We've talked about it before. What comes next? The same government that provoked him into action or reaction says, well, a horrible thing has happened. There is destruction upon the ecology will suffer for 150 years unless we take action now. This is our opportunity to come together to do away with all nuclear weapons. I can see ships of nuclear weapons being sent into space, and the whole world is going to rejoice at it. Utopia is on the horizon. We've destroyed the evil Russian Empire, and now, world, there's a new system, a new world order, a great reset. Come on board with us. It's going to be wonderful. Yeah. Right? World War I, the League of Nations. Right? We will trust us. We will never allow this to happen again. World War II, the United Nations. You can trust us. We have your backs. What did that lady say in the infomotion? What did she say? We've got this. And so you can just see that after a devastating event with the destruction of Russia and half of the Ukraine and some of Europe, even here, you can see this global movement coming into full action, presenting to humanity the prospect of a utopia. We have it. You will beat your swords into plowshares. You can do it. That's the end game. You see, this is their end game. And they're not far from it. I mean, they're on the threshold of such a thing happening. That's a likely scenario. That's Babylon. That's Babylon preparing to be destroyed, because God will destroy that Babylon.
So the interesting thing is, Baal was the chief god of the Babylonians.
Baal, yeah.
Yeah. And his attributes are the exact same attributes of Satan, which are also the attributes taken on by the Babylonian Empire, right?
Yeah.
So they behave, it's still that wanting to put man above God, right? Striving to be God thing.
Unity and rebellion. And that's why God destroyed the first Babel, Nimrod's Babel. Nebuchadnezzar's Babel was nothing. But Nimrod's Babel strove against God. And it got God's attention to the point where he said, let us go down and destroy it, because nothing is impossible for them. He was removing Nimrod's Babel, destroying it, subduing it, knowing that there would be another Babel, but his reasoning was rebellion and unity he will not tolerate. So do we have a sense of unity in rebellion today?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Even the entire LGBTQIA plus agenda is really a rebellion against God, because it's really a rebellion against the normal biological laws, right? Male, female. Now we say, oh, there's no such thing as male, female. We can change you to whatever sex you want.
Right. So now we're seeing the prospects of a global government in unity in full rebellion.
Yeah.
And so what's their purpose for wanting to neutralize Russia? They're not going to attain to this unity without Russia being removed, because Putin, he's been saying for decades that he will not be a part of Western hegemony, New World Order, Western style. Whereas China has been saying, we're on board with you guys. We're buddies.
Right, but China's being deceptive about it, right? They're saying we're on board with you guys, but what they really mean is we're going to be in charge.
Right.
Absolutely.
We'll be a part of the New World Order as long as Xi Jinping is head of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
But he is going to be a major player.
He's a major player.
Absolutely.
When Nixon, I'm not a crook, that guy.
Not many people left that remember that speech.
Yes.
When Nixon said to the then premier of China and to the entire world that it's time for China to get on board with the New World Order, to come on board with it. Nixon said that. In fact, it was Nixon who was the first American president to utter those words, New World Order.
Him and Henry Kissinger were quite a team.
Right.
Yes.
I don't think Nixon fully understood the implications of what he was saying, but he said it. It's time for China to come into the New World Order. Since then, what has been happening to China? China has been growing
on the rise
exponentially. They've become the strongest military in the world.
They basically have control with their Belt and Road program. They own many countries now, right?
Because the New World Order has found it necessary to factor them into it in a very large way, on a large scale. So China is the New World Order, along with Europe and the United States. It is what it is. So you think of a vulture. It has a head and two wings. The head of this New World Order, don't kid yourselves, is Europe. The United States of America are involved in this because of Europe.
Yes.
Europe is where this was conceived.
Yep.
The Council on Foreign Relations is a European movement idea. The Council on Foreign Relations, these French and these Londoners and these, from Switzerland, these are the ones who gave us that globalist movement.
Yeah, don't tell Hillary.
Right.
No, but she knows it. She knows it.
And it wasn't until the European unions came into being that we started with our NAFTA and all of our other stuff trying to do the same on our hemisphere.
So Western hegemony, Western New World Order ideas are actually European. So think of a vulture. You have a head and two wings. You have the head being Europe. You have one wing being the Americas and the other wing being China. It's a vulture. Yep. I'm not going to say an eagle. An eagle is too far a dignified bird to be compared with them.
It's a turkey buzzard along the side of the road.
But a buzzard. It's a vulture. It eats garbage, and so that's how I see it. You have a head, a tail, Africa, and you have the two wings. Why Africa? Because that's how Europe sees Africa.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it amazes me because if you had told me way back in the 70s that, for example, the French would let the Hague make laws for them, I would have never, ever believed it. That the French, who were so nationalistic
and independent-minded and proud.
Right. That's like having the Canadians make laws for us.
Right, right.
A few years ago with Gaddafi and with Hillary's involvement, we saw Europe being the head and Africa being the tail. And the left wing or the right wing of this vulture acted to get rid of an aspect of the tail. So Muammar Gaddafi, evil as he was at one time, had after Reagan bombed Tripoli pretty strongly in the 1980s, he had a life-changing type experience. And I remember when he proclaimed that he was no longer going to get involved in the things that he was involved in, and he meant it. A lot of people doubted him, but he meant it. He turned a new leaf. But then he began to seek the better good of the continent of Africa. He began to introduce a gold standard for all of Africa, which would do what to the EU?
Yeah.
So what happened? The EU began to threaten him. And then here comes Hillary Clinton on behalf of the EU, that whole situation with Benghazi. And she said, we came, we saw, and he died.
Yep, she did say that.
And she heckled.
Yep, she did say that.
And she heckled after that.
And she actually thought that she had Putin in her pocket because remember during one of her campaigns, the easy button that she presented? Because it was now going to be really easy to deal with Russia. Remember that?
Yeah, and so, listen, it's clear the New World Order is in place. There's a fly in the ointment, well, a couple, but the fly in the ointment that they see themselves having to deal with now is Russia. Israel is ultimately the greatest fly in the ointment.
Yep, that's coming.
So let's talk about this final Babylon now. So in Jeremiah chapter 51:45, we saw that the call that was sent out by Jeremiah is to come out of that system, don't have anything to do with it. It's about to be destroyed. And in Revelation chapter 18 now, if you can, Jim, read
Sure.
1 to 5.
After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was lit up with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and she has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison for every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities.
So how do you come out of this system, Babylon? If it is in fact a global system, covers the entire world, and it does, how do you come out of it? Do you run to the hills? Do you, bug out? Go live off the grid? Yeah, you can try that, but you'll also nullify yourself from any opportunity to be a part of what God is doing if
Right.
you run out into the mountains and live off the land. And I tell you, sometimes that sounds very appealing to me. I wouldn't mind going up in the mountains somewhere, on an island somewhere in the Pacific, and live off the island. That sounds wonderful. Off the grid, wow. But I can't. Why? Because I've been appointed to a work. God has appointed me to stand against this Babylon and to affront it and to confront it. So how do we come out of her? First of all, the coming out process is deeply, deeply spiritual, right? Because connected to this Babylon is the religious aspect of it, the spiritual aspect of it. Unfortunately, much of Christianity is interwoven, intermingled into this Babylonian system. Much of it. I mean, you look at Christianity, come on, Christianity, 2.5 billion Christians, perhaps 2 billion of us are wrapped up in a neo-pagan system that goes all the way back to Babylon, right? Alexander Hyssop, the two Babylons.
Yeah.
So you have Christianity that's effectively an ancient Babylonian cult, global cult. So what do? You come out of that. You denounce it. Spiritually, you detach from it. You have nothing to do with it. Come out of it. And be prepared to be the vessel or a vessel that God will use to confront it. Now, you have to be sure that that's what God's leading you to. But at a minimum, come out of it. Have nothing to do with it. Stand in opposition to it. There's a great polarization that's occurring, and we have to determine on what pole we stand. You see, so it is a difficult thing to consider that we live in such a time as this. Excuse me. But we have to come to terms with it. We have to see it for what it is. Bugging out, going off the grid, sticking your head in the sand, is not going to attain anything for you.
And in the end, it isn't going to help either.
And
No.
another thing that some of us are tempted to do, which is to pick up arms and prepare to
isn't
make
gonna
war
help
with
either.
it. Well, Revelation chapter 13 has a striking statement that says, who can make war with the beast? Who can fight against it? Mm-hmm. Right? So we can fight against it, but our war is not natural. Our war is not about carnal weapons, natural weapons. Our war is divinely powerful for the tearing down of strongholds and fortresses. That's where we fit in. Because when Jesus comes, now following Revelation chapter 18 is Revelation chapter 19.
19.
In Revelation chapter 19, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah comes.
Right.
The great king, he comes. And he comes, the first thing he does as he comes is he puts down this Babylon, destroys it. He would. I love the verbiage. He's going to seize the beast, seize the false prophet, and cast them into the lake of fire. He will bring all the nations before him, and he'll begin the process of judging. So this is what Jesus is coming to do. Now, we are being prepared for that event. And we live in the time when the church will make this incredible transformation from being the church here on earth to being that army that comes with him from heaven. Now, it's a kind of an awesome and dreadful thing to consider that this is going to happen perhaps in our lifetime, but it's going to happen. One generation of believers will experience it.
Right.
And it sounds pretty awesome and dreadful, but actually it's glorious. It's glorious because we will be transformed. And this goes off into a place where if you are a liberal Christian, if you are a nominal Christian, if you are not truly familiar with the precepts of the Bible as it relates to who we are and what we will become, you will find what I'm about to say is very, very difficult and taxing, but the Bible supports what I'm about to say. And this is what I'm going to say. We, the church, who are faithful in Messiah, when he comes, we will be physically transformed. This mortal will put on immortality. This wretched will put on the glory of God. This body will be put down, and I will be transformed, and I will raise with him. I will resurrect with him. And I will come in the same form that he is in, and we, myself and the church, will reign in the earth. A literal priesthood that will reign in the earth. This is real. This is not some Hollywood movie. This is real. The Bible tells us this. In the meantime, we're being prepared for it. So how do we prepare for it? We come out of the Babylonian system. We come out of Babylon. And at the same time, we prepare our minds for what is about to happen. What is the advantage of preparing our minds for the reality that we see in Revelation chapter 19? So that when we're faced with opposition and challenges, we're not beaten back by them. We know what's coming. We know the end of it. And so no opposition, no challenges will cause us to shrink back. We'll stand firm. So this is the advantage of knowing what I'm sharing with you now. We will have the strength to stand if we knew what was about to happen. So, yes, 3 Babylons, in effect, but Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon is by no means Babylon. There's only 2 Babylons. Nimrod's Babylon, which is a type, a foretaste of the ultimate Babylon, which is what we're going to see in the world today. There will never be, in all of God's creation, another abomination such as what we see in the world today. There will never be anything like this ever before, ever again.
Praise God. So that's our program. We're in the middle of the Feast of Sukkot, or booths. It literally translates, sometimes loosely translated tabernacles. We're doing tabernacle tours. We have a model of the tabernacle of Moses in the yard, and we're ushering people through tours every day throughout most of this month. And you can contact us or just come, especially on Saturday. We're having a major celebration for Sukkot on Saturday. There's tours throughout the day, and there's entertaining sessions in one of our buildings every hour, and we'll culminate the evening with a special worship service on Saturday, this upcoming Saturday, the 15th, and that'll be at 7:30 in the evening. So the public is welcome. It's worth it to do the tours, $7 per individual, $20 for a family. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to not just see what the Bible says about things, but to see a physical representation of them. We're also hosting a meeting on the 23rd, Sunday night the 23rd, with Shmuel Junger. He's a representative of CFOIC, Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. He will be sharing with us at 7 o'clock at night on Sunday, the 23rd of October. And so that's available for the public as well. So until next week, shalom.
She